The morning I reported to the battalion, the sun was not up yet, and a first lieutenant told me that helicopters were probably heavier than they looked. I was standing at the nose of a UH-60 Mike model Black Hawk, tail number ending in 47, with the aircraft logbook open across my forearm and a small flashlight in my teeth. It was 0530. The flight line smelled the way flight lines always smell, like jet fuel and cold metal and the last of the night. I had been there since 4:45, because that is what I do. I get to the aircraft before the aircraft needs me. The lieutenant came around the tail with a paper coffee cup in one hand and another young officer beside him. He was tall, with the kind of haircut men get when they are proud of their jaw, and he moved like a person who had recently been told he was talented and had believed it all the way down. His name tape said Thorne. The other one, shorter, wider, grinning before anything funny had happened, said Marsh. Thorne looked at me the way you look at furniture that is in the wrong place. Flight suit, no unit patch he recognized, a woman he had never seen standing at his aircraft before his brief. I watched him build a story about me in about 2 seconds. It was the wrong story. It is almost always the wrong story. Morning, he said, and then he smiled, and the smile was the problem. You lost. Fam rides are on Saturdays. The public affairs folks run those. This is the real flight line. I'm not lost, I said around the flashlight and took it out of my teeth. He tapped the skin of the aircraft twice with 2 knuckles, the way a man taps the hood of a car he is thinking about buying. These things are heavier than the simulator, if that's where you've been playing. Marsh laughed. Thorne warmed to it. Ever flown one, honey? For real, I mean. Not the ride at the museum. I had flown one for 19 years. I did not say so. There is a skill to not saying so, and I have spent a career learning it. When you are young, being underestimated feels like a fire alarm going off in your chest, and every part of you wants to reach for the proof, the record, the rank, the thing that will make the person in front of you sit down. That reaching is the tell of someone who is not yet sure of herself. I used to reach. I do not reach anymore. What I have instead is a stillness that people sometimes read as agreement, and it is not agreement. It is patience. It is a person who has learned that the truth does not need me to defend it before it has even been asked to speak. 2 crew chiefs were working the aircraft 2 spots down, and one of them, a young specialist, had heard the whole thing and gone very carefully expressionless, the way enlisted soldiers do when an officer is stepping on a rake in public and it is not their place to say so. He knew. Crew chiefs always know. They know who flies well, the way waiters know who tips. From 100 small signs, the customers never notice. He caught my eye for half a second and then looked back at his work, and in that half second there was an entire conversation, and the conversation was, "We both know how this ends, Chief, and I am going to enjoy it quietly." I can point you to the visitor lot, Thorne offered. Magnanimous now, a man doing a kindness. It's an easy mistake. You look the part, I'll give you that. I appreciate it, I said, and I meant the words to mean nothing, and they did. I closed the logbook instead and set it on the cabin floor where it belonged, and I let the quiet do what the quiet does, which is nothing, right up until it does everything. Behind him, 40 feet away, the door of the Flight Operations building opened, and Sergeant First Class Marla Dietrich came out with a clipboard and the day's flight schedule, printed and still warm from the machine, and she walked to the board bolted to the wall outside operations and pinned it up. Thorne did not see her yet. He was still enjoying himself. It's cute, honestly, he said. You've got the whole outfit and everything. I do, I said. A Black Hawk 2 spots down began to taxi, and its rotor wash rolled over us in a wave of noise and grit, and the flight schedule on the board fluttered once against its pins and lay flat again. Thorne turned his collar up against the wind and laughed at nothing, and I looked past him at that piece of paper, flattening itself against the board, and I thought, as I have thought 100 times in 100 versions of this exact morning, that people will tell you who you are with tremendous confidence, and the only honest answer is to go do the work and let it correct them. There is a version of me that would have handled it differently at 25. That version does not exist anymore. What replaced her is quieter, and she gets to the aircraft first. I am a Chief Warrant Officer 4. In the Army, that means I have spent a long time becoming very good at one thing, and the thing I became good at is flying and teaching other people to fly, and staying alive while both of those things try to kill you. I am the Senior Standardization Instructor Pilot for the battalion, which is a long title for a simple job. I am the person who decides whether you are safe to be trusted with an aircraft and the lives it carries. The battalion commander had asked for me by name. That is not something I say to be admired. I say it because it is the fact that the lieutenant did not have, and the day was going to hand it to him, whether he wanted it or not. I had come up the hard way, which in aviation means I started on the ground. I enlisted at 18 and spent my first years as a crew chief, which is the person who keeps the aircraft flyable and rides in the back and loves the machine in a way pilots sometimes forget to. I learned the aircraft with my hands before I ever learned it with my hands on the controls. When I went to flight school, I already knew what every panel sounded like when it was unhappy. That is a gift you cannot buy and cannot fake. And it is the reason I can tell you a bad day is coming from the way a transmission whines before any gauge agrees with me. The battalion had asked for me because of a thing that is hard to explain to people outside aviation. Every unit accumulates habits, and some of those habits are quietly unsafe, small shortcuts that everyone takes because nothing bad has happened yet. And the job of a standardization pilot is to walk in and find those habits and fix them before the day comes when the shortcut and the emergency arrive at the same time. It is not a job that makes you popular. Nobody throws a party for the person who tells them their comfortable routine is going to get somebody killed. You do it anyway, because the alternative is a folded flag and a family in a front row, and I have sat in enough of those rooms to have run out of patience with the idea that being liked is more important than being right. I did not learn to fly to be admired. I learned to fly because when I was a crew chief, riding in the back, I understood that the person on the controls held every life in the aircraft in their hands, and I decided I wanted to be worthy of holding them. That is the whole of my ambition. It has never been about the rank. The rank is just what they give you when you keep being worthy of the seat long enough that they run out of reasons not to. Fisk understood some of this already, which is why I had taken her on. She had the rare quality of caring more about being good than about looking good, and those are not the same thing, and the difference between them is most of what separates the pilots who grow old from the ones who do not. She was watching me handle the lieutenant, and I could see her filing it away, learning the stillness the way I once had to learn it, from someone who had it before me. The young pilot I was teaching that season found me at the aircraft a few minutes after Thorne wandered off to enjoy the rest of his morning. Her name is Nadia Fisk, a chief warrant officer too, sharp and serious and still a little afraid of being wrong, which is the correct amount of afraid. She had seen the whole thing from the fuel point. "They don't know who you are," she said. She was not amused. She was closer to angry on my behalf, which is a kindness I did not need but appreciated. "No," I said. "You could have told him." I handed her the logbook so she could learn the habit of holding it. "Knowing wouldn't teach him anything," I said. "The aircraft will. It always does. It doesn't care what he thinks of me, and by 10 o'clock neither will he." She almost smiled. "That's cold, Chief." "That's standardization," I said. "Sign the risk assessment. You're reading it with me." I will tell you what standardization actually is because the word sounds like a filing cabinet, and it is closer to a promise. It is the idea that when you climb into an aircraft, it should not matter which unit you came from or who taught you or how you feel that morning. The right way to do the thing is the right way to do the thing, written down, agreed on, drilled until it is shared, so that any two aviators who have never met can get in an aircraft together and fly it as if they had flown together for years, because they both learned the same correct way. It is how we turn a collection of individuals into a crew. It is deeply unglamorous, and it is the reason more of us come home than used to, and I have given my life to it. And I will not apologize for taking it seriously in front of a lieutenant who thinks the serious part is the flying. The flying is the easy part. Anybody can be taught to move the controls. The hard part, the part that takes a career, is learning to do the boring thing correctly on the 10,000th morning when nothing is wrong and no one is watching, and it would be so easy to skip a step. That is the whole job. The Valley just taught me why it matters, in a way I would not wish on anyone. I signed it as the pilot in command and the evaluator for the day, my name in the block at the top the way it had been in that block 1,000 times, and I did not think about the lieutenant again for a while. I have learned to spend my attention carefully. There is never as much of it as the day wants. The seat beside a pilot is never really empty. Mine has had someone in it since the spring of 2011, and his name was Aaron Vasquez. He was a flight medic, a sergeant, 26 years old, and he was the best I ever flew with. He was from a small town in the middle of the country, the kind of place with one stoplight and a water tower with the town name painted on it. And he had a way of making the back of an aircraft feel like a place where things were going to be all right, even when they were plainly not going to be. He talked to the wounded the whole time he worked on them, a low, steady stream of nonsense and reassurance, calling grown men buddy and pal, and telling them their mothers would never forgive him if he let them make a mess in his nice, clean helicopter. I have watched him keep a 19-year-old with a torn, open leg laughing, actually laughing, on the worst day of that kid's life. all the way to the hospital pad. That is a gift, and it is rarer than flying, and you cannot teach it. We flew together for a full deployment before the day in the valley, and in that time I learned to trust him the way you trust your own hands, which is to say without thinking about it, which is the only real trust there is. When you fly medevac, the pilot and the medic are two halves of one animal. I put the aircraft where he needed it, and he did the impossible thing at the end of the cable, and neither of us could do our half without the other doing his, and out of that grew the kind of bond that does not have a good civilian word. Closer than friends. Something like family, except you chose it, and it was forged in a place most families never have to go. This was in the eastern part of Afghanistan, in the mountains, where the valleys are so narrow that flying into them feels like threading a needle with a bus, and the weather changes its mind faster than you can. I was a chief warrant officer, too, then, a pilot in command on a medevac bird, young for the seat but not new to it. And Vasquez rode in the back with his aid bag and his terrible jokes and a calm that I have spent 15 years trying to describe to student pilots and never quite managed. The call came in the middle of the afternoon. I remember the light, because the light in those valleys in the late afternoon is beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with anything. Gold coming down the western slope, while men on the eastern one tried to kill each other. And the indifference of it used to make me furious until I understood that the indifference is the point, that the mountain does not care, and the sky does not care, and the only caring in the whole scene is the small humankind, carried in on aircraft, and that we were the caring, Vasquez and I, we were the thing that had come to say these lives matter to somebody. 2 soldiers wounded on a ridgeline, one of them badly, no place to land within a mile of them because the ground was all rock and slope and men who wanted us dead. The only way to get them was the hoist. That means you bring the aircraft to a hover over the wounded, and you lower your medic on a cable, and he clips them in one at a time, and you lift them up, and the entire time you are doing this, you are holding a 15,000-pound aircraft absolutely still in the air over a mountain while people shoot at it. You do not get to maneuver. You do not get to be evasive. You hold. That is the job. The pilot holds and the medic goes down into the worst moment of someone else's life on the end of a wire. "Hold it steady, Chief," Vasquez said over the intercom, the way he always did. Not because I needed reminding, but because it was our ritual. The thing he said so we both knew we were about to do the hard part together. "I've got them." I held it steady. The valley walls threw the rotor noise back at us so it sounded like the whole mountain was an engine. I could feel the rounds more than hear them, little coughs of disturbance in the air, the aircraft flinching in ways only the person on the controls can feel. I kept the nose where it needed to be, and I kept the cable vertical, and I watched my crew chief's hands in the mirror as he ran the hoist, and I did the only thing I could do for Vasquez, which was be a rock in the sky so he could work. The wind in a valley like that does not blow, it churns, coming off the walls in gusts that shove the aircraft one way and then release it, and holding a stable hover in it is like trying to hold a full cup of coffee level on a boat. You do it with 1,000 tiny corrections a minute, none of them conscious anymore after enough years, your hands and feet talking to the aircraft in a language below thought. My crew chief called the hoist for me because I could not look down. I had to keep my eyes out and up, flying attitude off the horizon and the valley wall, trusting his voice in my ear the way I trusted Vasquez on the cable, everyone doing their one piece, the whole animal working. "Steady," my crew chief said. "Coming down, 20 feet, 10, he's on the ground." He got the first soldier up. He went back down for the second. He was clipping the second man in when the aircraft took the hits that mattered, and the story of exactly what happened next is one I have told to a review board and to myself 10,000 times, and I am not going to perform it here. What I will tell you is that I got the aircraft and the wounded, and my crew chief home, and I did not get Vasquez home, and the difference between those 2 sentences is the reason I fly the way I fly and teach the way I teach. They gave me a Distinguished Flying Cross for holding the hover. I have never once looked at it without thinking that a medal is a strange thing to receive for the worst day of your life. What I kept from that day was not the medal. It was this. The aircraft did exactly what I asked of it because I had asked correctly in the worst conditions I will ever fly in. And the reason I could ask correctly was that 1,000 boring mornings had made the correct thing automatic. Panic is just noise. Training is the decision, made in advance, not to obey it. That is what the schedule board could not tell Lieutenant Thorne about me. It could only tell him my name. He found the board at about 0550. I did not see the exact moment, but Dietrich did, and she told me later with a great deal of satisfaction because Dietrich runs flight operations the way a good bartender runs a bar, which is to say she sees everything and forgets nothing and enjoys the human comedy more than she lets on. Thorne drifted over to the board the way pilots do before a flight, to check the tail number and the times and the frequencies, all the small facts you carry into the aircraft. He was still loose, still pleased with his morning. He found line 4. Line 4 had his name on it, and Marsh's, the two of them scheduled for their periodic standardization check, the flight that decides whether a young aviator gets to keep progressing or gets sent back to relearn what he skipped. And above the two lieutenants' names, in the block for the evaluator and pilot in command, was one word: Merrick. Dietrich said his face did an interesting thing, and Dietrich has watched a great many faces read a great many schedules, so she is a connoisseur of the expression. She said he read it twice, the way you reread a text that has bad news in it, hoping the second read fixes the first. Then he looked around the flight line. Not for me, not yet, because he had not connected the woman at the aircraft to the name on the board. He was looking for some other Merrick, some man he had not met, a chief he could picture. There wasn't one. Line 4, sir, Dietrich said, because she had walked up beside him, and she is not a person who lets a moment go to waste. You and Lieutenant Marsh, you're with Chief Merrick for your check today? Which one's Merrick? Thorne said. It was not really a question. It was a man asking the universe to be different than it was. The chief you were talking to at 7 Aircraft, Dietrich said pleasantly. Standardization pilot. She's the one flying it. I was at that moment doing a controls check with Fisk, my hands moving through the cyclic and collective and pedals, calling each one, feeling for anything that felt wrong. So I did not see Thorne's face, but I felt the shift on the flight line the way you feel weather coming, and I looked up, and he was standing at the board 30 feet away, looking at me, and the whole loose confidence had gone out of him and left something younger behind. The battalion commander made it worse for him, though the commander did not mean to. Lieutenant Colonel Everett Cole came through the flight line on his way to his own aircraft, saw me, and lifted a hand. Chief Merrick, sissy, he said. Glad you're the one flying it. We're lucky to have you back in the seat. And he kept walking, the way commanders do, having no idea he had just set a stone on the scale. I should tell you what a thing like that costs the person it happens to, because it is easy to enjoy the picture of the arrogant lieutenant getting his comeuppance and to forget that he was also just a young man having a genuinely bad morning in front of people whose opinion of him mattered. I did not want him destroyed. I have never wanted anyone destroyed. Destroyed people do not fly well, and they do not lead well, and they carry the destruction into how they treat the next person who is smaller than them, and the whole rotten thing goes around again. What I wanted was for him to be corrected, which is a different verb entirely, and correction requires the person to survive it, with enough of themselves intact to change. Thorne watched the colonel greet me by name. He watched me nod and go back to my controls check, as if none of it had touched me, because none of it had. And I will tell you what I saw when I finally did look straight at him, because it matters for everything that came after. I did not see a man being humiliated and enjoying my part in it, because I was not enjoying it. I saw a kid who had just realized he had walked up to the one person on the flight line whose entire job was to decide if he was any good, and had opened with a joke about whether she could fly. Marsh got there first, in his head. I watched it happen. Marsh looked at the board, looked at me, and I saw him do the arithmetic and arrive at the answer a full minute before Thorne did, and the thing that impressed me was what he did with the answer. He did not smirk at his friend's misfortune, and he did not panic on his own account. He went quiet and a little pale, and he started visibly to think, which is the correct response to discovering that the ground is not where you thought it was. That told me more about Marsh than any maneuver would. Thorne came over. To his credit, he came over. A lot of them do not. A lot of them find something urgent to do at the far end of the flight line and spend the walk to the aircraft constructing a version of events in which none of it happened. And then they climb in and fly badly, because half their mind is still defending the story. Thorne walked straight at the thing instead, which was the first genuinely good sign I had from him all morning. Chief, he said. That is. Good morning. Good morning, Lieutenant, I said. Go get your gear. Briefs at 06:15. Don't be late for it. Chief, about the. He stopped. He was trying to find the apology and not finding a door into it. The flight's what matters now, I said, not unkindly. Save it. Show me in the air. Go. He went. The brief is where I learned what kind of pilot he was, which is a different question than whether he could fly. There is a saying in aviation that the flight is won or lost in the brief, and like most sayings that survive a long time, it is true. By the time the engines start, you have either done the thinking or you have not, and the aircraft will find out which within the first 10 minutes. I have never once regretted a thorough brief, and I have attended the aftermath of several that were rushed, and the pattern is so consistent that I no longer think of the brief as preparation for the flight. I think of the brief as the first part of the flight, the part that happens on the ground. We sat in the small briefing room off operations, the four of us, me and Fisk observing and Thorne and Marsh being evaluated, and I walked them through the mission the way I walk everyone through the mission, which is completely weather, fuel, weight and balance, route, airspace, the aircraft's known issues, and then the part people want to rush, the emergency procedures, the long, ugly catalog of everything that can go wrong and exactly what your hands are supposed to do about it when it does. Weather first. There was a layer of cloud moving in from the west that would not matter for what we were doing, but would matter to a crew that had not planned for it, and I made them tell me what they would do if the ceiling came down, and where they would go, and how much fuel that would cost. And I watched Thorne answer quickly and confidently and mostly right, and I watched Marsh answer slowly and less confidently and entirely right, and I filed that away too. Fuel next. Route. The airspace we would share with 2 other aircraft and the tower that would keep us apart. The known issues on this particular tail number, the small write-ups in the logbook that a good pilot reads and a lazy one signs past. Thorne had not read them. I could tell because when I asked about the intermittent caution light that had been written up twice that week, he had no answer. And a caution light you do not know about is a caution light that will frighten you when it appears, and a frightened pilot is a slow pilot, and in an aircraft, slow is sometimes another word for dead. Thorne had decided, somewhere between the flight line and the briefing room, to handle his embarrassment by being excellent. I understood the instinct. It is a bad instinct. Embarrassment wants to be erased by a big performance, and a big performance is the last thing you want in a cockpit. "I've got this cold, Chief," he said when we got to the emergency review. He said it in a generous voice, a voice offering to save me time. "We can move through the EPs quick, I know them." "Say the one for a hydraulics failure in a hover," I said. He said it. He said most of it. He got the order of 2 steps wrong, which in a real hydraulics failure in a real hover is the difference between a hard landing and a very bad day. And he said the wrong 2 steps with total confidence, which is worse than saying them slowly and unsurely because the aircraft does not grade you on confidence. "Close," I said. "Say it again, slower." He chafed at that. I watched him chafe. Marsh, beside him, had gone quiet in the useful way, the way of a man who has realized the smart move is to watch and learn. And I made a note that Marsh might be the better of the 2 by lunch, not because he knew more, but because he had figured out faster that he did not know everything. Weight and balance is another one people rush, and it is another one that kills people because an aircraft loaded wrong flies wrong in ways that only announce themselves at the worst moment. I made them do the numbers. I made them do the numbers again when Thorne did them fast and got a figure that was close enough to right that a lazy evaluator would have let it go. I am not a lazy evaluator. Close enough to right is a phrase that belongs on the list of things people say shortly before the investigation. Staff Sergeant Reuben Kessler, my crew chief for the flight, leaned in the doorway with his arms crossed and his face doing nothing, which is a crew chief's highest art. Kessler had flown with me for 2 years. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew the lieutenant had stepped on a rake, and he knew I was not going to make it worse, and he also knew I was not going to let a single item slide, because the items are the whole point. The emergency review is the part you never get to skip, I told Thorne, and I did not say it unkindly. Every person I have ever known who died in one of these did the fun parts beautifully. "Say the hydraulics EP again." He said it again, slower. He got it right. "Good," I said. "Now we go fly." I could have grounded him with a sentence. I want to be honest about that, because it is the center of the whole thing. I had the authority and I had the cause. He had gotten an emergency procedure wrong, and he had walked onto a flight line and mocked a stranger, and either of those, on a bad enough day, is a reason to say not today, come back when you are ready, and send a lieutenant home to think about his choices. It would have been within the rules. It would even have been satisfying in the small, mean way that being underestimated makes a person want satisfaction. I strapped in instead. I have thought a great deal over the years about the difference between justice and teaching, because my job lives in the narrow space between them. Justice would have been to ground him, and justice would have been correct, and justice would have taught him one thing, which is that I had power over him, and he had crossed me. That is a real lesson, and it is a useless one. because the next time he is alone in an aircraft with an emergency, my power over him will not be in the cockpit. Only his training will. So I set Justice down, which I will admit took some doing, because the part of me that had stood on the flight line inside his little story wanted very much to pick Justice up and use it. I set it down and I picked up the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that does not feel as good in the moment and matters infinitely more later. I decided to fly the evaluation exactly the way I fly every evaluation, straight down the middle, no mercy and no malice, and to let the aircraft do the teaching. Because here's what I have learned in 19 years of this. You cannot humiliate a skill into someone. You cannot shame a person into being safe. The lieutenant did not need me to be angry. He needed 90 minutes in the air with someone who would not perform for him and would not save him from the truth. He needed the seat to get honest with him. My job was to make the seat honest and then get out of the way of it. Fisk caught me at the aircraft before I climbed in. She is perceptive, that one, more than she knows. "You okay, Chief?" she asked quietly so the lieutenants would not hear. She had figured out, I think, that a hoist mission and a hover and a medevac company were not abstractions to me, and that a check flight would put me back in the air doing the thing I do, and that the thing I do has ghosts in it. "I'll be okay at shutdown," I said, which was true and which is the only promise I make anymore. I do not promise to be okay during. I promise to be okay when it is over, and I keep that promise by getting everyone home. That is the whole trick. That is all of it. Before I climbed in, I did the walk around the aircraft one more time, alone, the way I always do, touching the things I have already checked, because touching them is a kind of prayer for people who do not pray. The tail rotor, the main rotor blades, each one running my hand along the leading edge, the static ports, the pitot tubes, the drain valves. Thorne watched me do it, and I could see him wondering why the evaluator was pre-flighting an aircraft 2 junior pilots had already pre-flighted. And the answer, which I did not give him then, but will give you now, is that the aircraft does not care how many times it has been checked. It only cares whether it was checked correctly this time by someone who would notice the one thing that is wrong. I have found the one thing wrong more than once, on mornings that felt exactly this ordinary. That is why I keep looking on the mornings that feel ordinary. They all feel ordinary until the one that does not. I climbed into the left seat and ran my hands over the controls and the switches in the order I have run them 10,000 times. And the order did for me what it always does, which is make the cockpit small and clear and mine. The engines began to spool up. That rising turbine whine that I love more than almost any sound on earth. And the smell of jet fuel came through the vents, and Vasquez took his seat behind me the way he always does. And I keyed the intercom and told the crew we were ready to lift. The aircraft lifted the way it always does, that moment where the wheels stop mattering and the whole machine becomes a thing suspended on its own noise, and I felt the flight line drop away beneath us and the morning open up, and whatever else was true about the day, that part is always good. 19 years, and it has never once stopped being good. The leaving of the ground. If it ever does, I will know it is time to stop. We did the easy things first. We always do. Traffic pattern work, some basic maneuvers, the aircraft handling the way a good aircraft handles, which is like an extension of your own arms once you have flown long enough. Thorne flew the easy things well. I told him so because it was true and because a person flies better when they are not braced for the next correction. He relaxed. That was fine. I wanted him relaxed for the part that mattered. Then I reached over, at a moment of my choosing, and I rolled one of the engine power control levers back to simulate a single engine failure, and I said, in the flat, ordinary voice I use for exactly this, "Emergency, number 1 engine." An engine failure in a Black Hawk is survivable. It is, in fact, extremely survivable, because the aircraft is built to fly on one engine, and the whole point of the drill is that a trained pilot handles it as a procedure, and not as a crisis. Lower the collective a touch, maintain your airspeed, identify the failure, confirm it, and fly the aircraft to a safe landing while your other engine does its job. It is choreography. It is the choreography he had wanted to skip in the brief. Thorne did not lower the collective. He pulled. It is the instinct of a frightened person to climb away from the ground, and it is exactly wrong, because pulling more power from an aircraft that has just lost half its power bleeds off your rotor speed, and rotor speed is the only thing keeping you in the air. The low rotor warning came on, that horn that every Army aviator hears in their nightmares, and the aircraft began to settle and yaw, and Thorne froze with his hand pulling the wrong direction, and his eyes very wide, and for 1 second, 1 full second, We were a 15,000-pound machine losing the argument with gravity because a young man was afraid. "My controls," I said. I did not shout it. I have never once shouted it. You say it clearly, you take the controls, and the other person lets go, and Thorn, whatever else was true about him, was trained well enough to let go. I put the collective down where it belonged and let the rotor speed recover. I got the nose to where it needed to be. I confirmed the good engine and gave it what it needed, and I flew the aircraft, single engine, calm, unremarkable, back into stable flight. It took perhaps 8 seconds. It felt, I am sure, to the lieutenant, like a very long time. It felt to me like the shortest and easiest thing I had done in years, because I have held a hover over a mountain with people dying below me and rounds coming up through the floor, and there is nothing a training area can produce that my hands have not already survived. Here is the thing about the recovery that the lieutenant could not have understood, sitting there with his eyes wide and his hand frozen on the collective. It was not brave, and it was not fast, and it did not feel like a rescue. It felt like following a checklist. That is the entire secret, and it is a secret that sounds like a disappointment when you first hear it. The people who save the aircraft are not the ones with the quickest reflexes or the coolest nerve. They are the ones who made the correct response so automatic through so many boring repetitions that when the fear arrives, there is no decision left to make. The hands already know, and the fear has nothing to grab onto because there is no hesitation for it to fill. I did not outbrave the emergency. I outboringed it years in advance on 1,000 mornings, exactly like the one where a lieutenant asked me if I had ever flown one. That was the moment the two timelines touched, if you want to know. For one beat, the settling aircraft and the low rotor horn and the yaw put me back in a valley in 2011, and I felt the old fear reach for me the way it always will, and I did what the valley taught me to do, which is notice the noise and decline to obey it. The past did not take the controls. I did. "Your controls," I said, when we were stable, and I gave the aircraft back to him. "Fly it to the airfield, we'll talk on the ground." He flew us home very carefully, hands light on the controls now, the swagger entirely gone out of them, and there is a particular way a person flies right after the aircraft has scared them honest. They fly gently, almost tenderly, the way you handle something you have just understood could hurt you. It does not last, that tenderness, and it should not, because you cannot fly afraid forever. But it is a good thing to feel, once, early, so that the respect underneath it can take root and stay after the fear fades. I have seen pilots who never got scared young, and it made them careless old. And careless old pilots do not, as a rule, get to be careless ancient ones. He did not say anything the whole way back. Behind me, Kessler caught my eye in the mirror and gave me the smallest nod a human being can give, which from Kessler is a standing ovation. Kessler has been in the back of aircraft for 13 years, and he has felt a great many recoveries from a great many seats, and his nod meant, "That was clean, Chief." And it also meant, "The kid is going to be all right." And it also meant, "I am glad it was you in that seat and not somebody with something to prove." All of that in one small movement of a helmet. Enlisted soldiers say more with less than any people I have ever known. We debriefed in the same small room, and I will tell you that the debrief is where I earn my pay. More than the flying, because anyone with enough hours can fly, and the rare thing is to tell a person the truth in a way they can actually use. I did not raise my voice. I did not bring up the flight line. I put the flight up on the board, beat by beat, the good and the bad, and I made him walk through the engine failure with me, and I made him say, out loud, what he had done and what he should have done, because a person does not really learn a thing until they have said it in their own voice. "You pulled," I said. "Tell me why." "I don't know," he said. And then, because he was smarter than his morning had made him look, he tried again. I panicked. I wanted to climb. I know it's wrong. I knew it was wrong while I was doing it, and I did it anyway. "That's the most useful sentence you've said all day," I told him. And I meant it, because a person who can say, "I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway," has stopped defending himself, and a person who has stopped defending himself can finally start learning. Everything before that sentence is noise. Everything after it is education. You knew, and your hands did the other thing. That gap is the whole job. We close that gap with the boring parts. The EPs you wanted to skip are how you make the right thing automatic so it beats the wrong thing to your hands. You do not get to be casual with other people's lives. You had a crew in that aircraft. You had me. If I am not in that seat, you settle that aircraft into the ground. Fix this. And I mean actually fix it, and you will be a good pilot. You have the hands. You do not yet have the discipline. The discipline is the part that keeps the hands alive. He was quiet for a while. Marsh beside him was taking notes so fast he was practically transcribing. When did you know, Thorne asked, that I was going to pull on the collective? When did you know I'd get it wrong? In the brief, I said, when you wanted to skip the emergency review, not because skipping it made you wrong, but because wanting to skip it told me where your attention went, and your attention went to the parts that feel good and away from the parts that feel like homework. The aircraft always finds the place your attention doesn't go. Always. It is uncanny. It is almost as if it knows. I let that sit. I did not want you to pull. I would have been happy to fly 90 boring minutes and sign a clean pass. But if there was a hole in you, I would rather it show up today, with me in the seat in a training area at a safe altitude, than 3 years from now with a crew in the back and no one beside you who has done this 10,000 times. Today was the safest day you will ever have to be that wrong. I gave you a safe place to fail. That is the kindest thing an evaluator can do, and it never once feels kind while it is happening. Why didn't you just tell me who you were? Thorne said finally. On the flight line, you let me stand there. Because who I am is not the point, I said. If I flash a rank at you and you straighten up, all you have learned is to be afraid of rank. That is worthless in an aircraft. An emergency does not care about my rank or yours. I wanted you to meet the thing itself, not my name. Now you have. What are you going to do about it? The result of his check was a conditional. Not a pass, not a bust. A conditional, which means additional training and a reflight, which is the honest outcome for a pilot with good hands and a hole in his discipline. I wrote it up plainly. I did not decorate it with the flight line. That was not in the file because it did not belong in the file. What belonged in the file was what happened in the air, and what happened in the air was that a young man learned the exact size of what he did not know, which is the beginning of every good pilot I have ever met. Marsh caught me at the aircraft afterward, while the lineman chalked the wheels, and Thorne was inside signing his paperwork. He stood there a second, working up to something, and then he just said it. Chief, I laughed this morning. On the line. I want to say I'm sorry for that. I didn't. I should have said something, and I laughed instead. And that's worse, honestly. I looked at him for a moment. It is worse, I agreed. Because it was, and because he already knew it, and lying to him would have insulted the honesty it took to come over. The person who laughs along is doing a quieter version of the same thing, and the quiet version is easier to get away with, which is exactly why it's worth watching yourself for. You saw it faster than he did today. Keep seeing it faster. That's a kind of courage, too, the seeing. He nodded and went to find his ride, and I thought, that one is going to be fine. That one was mostly already fine. Lieutenant Colonel Cole stopped me outside operations. How'd the lieutenants do? He asked. One of them had a hard morning that's going to make him better, I said. The other one figured out how to learn by watching. They'll both be fine. Give me 2 months with Thorne. Cole nodded. He is a good commander. He did not ask for the story. He trusted the pilot he had asked for by name. The flight line emptied out in the late afternoon, the way it does, and I stayed, the way I do, and I sat in the operations building with a folder I had been carrying from assignment to assignment for a very long time without opening. It was Vasquez's folder, or rather it was the folder of the thing I had never finished for Vasquez. His actions on the hoist that day, the way he went down a second time, knowing what was coming up at us, the way he clipped in a wounded man while the aircraft took fire, those actions had been recognized at the time with the medal that the process hands out for a death. But the higher award, the one the mission truly merited, the packet that would have named exactly what he did and why it mattered, had stalled years ago in the way that paperwork stalls, and I had let it stall, and I had told myself it was because of the process. It was not because of the process. It was because finishing it meant writing the day down, all of it in my own hand, in the flat official language that makes the worst afternoon of your life into a numbered narrative. It meant opening the valley on purpose. I had been unwilling to do that for 15 years, and I had dressed my unwillingness up as busyness, the way we do. I opened the folder. I found the statement I had started and abandoned so long ago that the date at the top belonged to a younger woman, and I finished it. I wrote what Vasquez did. I wrote the second descent. I wrote the words he said to me, hold it steady, I've got them, and I wrote that he did, in fact, have them, that both of those wounded soldiers were alive because a sergeant with an aid bag rode a wire down into a killing field twice, and that the second time cost him everything. There is a woman in that small town in the middle of the country who has spent 15 years being the mother of a son who died a hero, which is a thing people say to her at the grocery store and at church and on the anniversary, and I have always wondered whether the word hero worn that smooth by that many well-meaning mouths, still means anything to her, or whether it has become just a sound people make so they do not have to say the true and unbearable thing, which is that her boy is gone and no medal will bring him back. I could not fix that. Nobody can fix that. But I could make the record say, precisely and forever, in the language the Army keeps, exactly what her son did, and exactly what it cost, and exactly whose lives are still being lived because of him. Two men who went home to their own mothers because Aaron Vasquez went down a wire twice. Their children exist because of him. That is not a sound people make at the grocery store. That is a fact, and I could put it in the record, and I had been failing to for 15 years. I signed it as the pilot in command, the person who was there, the only one who could say what I said. And I put it in the outbox for the sergeant major to move up the chain in the morning, 15 years late, which is late, but which is not never. Being right about the lieutenant had not felt like winning. It had not felt like anything, really, except like a normal day at work, because it was one. But finishing the thing for Vasquez felt like setting down a weight I had been carrying so long, I had stopped noticing it was a weight and had started thinking it was just the shape of my back. People ask me sometimes, the ones who know a little of the story, whether flying still brings the valley back, whether every hover is a haunting. It is not like that. It has never been like that. The valley is not a ghost that jumps out at me. It is more like a room I carry, a room I can walk into when I choose and mostly choose not to. And what I keep in that room is not the fear and not the noise and not the terrible end of it. What I keep in that room is Vasquez saying, hold it steady, I've got them, and me holding it steady and him having them. Two men had them. I go into that room to remember that a thing can be the worst day of your life and also the day you did your job so completely that people are alive because of it. And both of those are true at once, and learning to hold both without letting one erase the other is most of what it means to have survived something and stayed whole. I sat in the empty operations building for a while after that. I did not cry, if you are wondering. I am not built to cry easily anymore. I just sat, and let the seat beside me be a little less occupied than it had been that morning. Thorn came back. That is the part of the story I did not expect, and it is the part I have come to value most. Some of them do not come back. Some of them take a conditional as an insult and carry a grudge into the next thing, and never quite forgive the person who told them the truth. Thorn was not that. He showed up at my aircraft 2 days later, before the sun, which I noticed, and he had the emergency procedures with him. And he had clearly spent 48 hours making the boring parts automatic. Chief, he said, I want to reflight. But before that, I want you to teach me the part I skipped, not the flying, the other part. The part where you stayed calm because you'd already decided to. I don't know how to do that, and I want to. That's the only part worth teaching, I said. The flying is easy. Staying alive while you fly is the whole education. Get in. We'll start today. And we did. I want to be careful not to make it sound like a movie, where the arrogant young man is humbled in one dramatic flight and walks off transformed with a swell of music. Real change is slower and less cinematic than that. It happens in small increments over weeks, in the repetition of correct things, in 100 unremarkable mornings where a person chooses the boring right way one more time until it stops being a choice. That is how anyone actually becomes good at anything worth being good at. There is no single moment. There is only the accumulation and the willingness to keep accumulating after the humbling flight, when the lesson has faded and the ego has healed and the temptation to coast comes back. Thorn kept accumulating. That, and not the bad morning, is the reason I can tell you he turned out well. I spent those 2 months on him the way I spend 2 months on the ones worth spending it on. We flew the emergency procedures until they were dull, and then we flew them past dull into the place where they stop being things you remember and start being things you are. I taught him the trick that is not a trick, the deciding in advance, the way you build the calm before you need it so that it is simply there, already yours when the noise comes. He was a good student once he stopped performing. Most of them are. The performing is almost always fear wearing a costume. And once you get a person to set the costume down, what is usually underneath is somebody who badly wants to be good and was afraid he was not, which describes nearly everyone I've ever taught, including, a long time ago, me. Fisk earned her next rating that month, and she is going to be better than I am, which is the point of the whole enterprise and the only kind of immortality this job offers. Marsh turned out to be exactly what I thought he would be, a quiet, competent pilot who learned by watching and never once needed to be the smartest person in the room, and those are the ones who fly the longest. And Thorn, who started that first morning by asking a stranger if she had ever flown one, became, over the next 2 months, a pilot I would trust with a crew. He earned it. I did not give it to him. That distinction matters more than any other one in my line of work. Word gets around a battalion faster than any aircraft. By the end of that first week, the story of the report in morning had made its rounds, the way these stories do, and I noticed the flight line change around me in small ways. Not deference, exactly. I do not want deference, and it is useless in a cockpit anyway. What changed was that the young pilots started reading the write-ups in the logbooks before I asked, and doing the weight and balance twice without being told, and staying for the boring parts of the brief with something that looked less like obligation and more like appetite. That is the only kind of respect that matters in my line of work. Not the kind where they straighten up when you walk in. The kind where they get better because you are there. A room full of people afraid of my rank would keep me awake at night. A room full of people quietly raising their own standard because they watched what a standard looks like. That is worth staying for. I stayed on as the standardization pilot. I signed the schedule most mornings, my name in the block at the top, and it stopped being a thing anyone was surprised by, which is how it should be. The seat beside me was still not empty, and it never will be. But it had gotten lighter, the way weight gets lighter when you finally put down the part of it that was never yours to carry, the guilt, and keep only the part that is, which is the memory. And the memory is not a burden. The memory is the reason I get to the aircraft first. I want to say something to you, whoever you are, because I think there is a decent chance you have had a morning like the one I started with. Someone decided who you were before you had said a word. They looked at you and built a small wrong story and handed it to you like a fact, and you had to stand there inside it, knowing it was wrong, deciding whether to argue. I know that feeling. I have stood on a flight line inside somebody's wrong story more times than I can count, and I have learned something about it that I would give to you if I could hand it across. You do not have to correct them. You do not owe anyone the true story of who you are on their schedule, in their moment, to soothe their comfort. The insult is loud and the work is quiet, and it can feel in the loud moment like the quiet is losing. It is not losing. Let the work answer. The work always answers, and it answers with more authority than you ever could in the moment because the work is real, and the insult is just a story someone told too soon. And here is the harder half of it, the half nobody likes. So I will say it plainly. Letting the work answer requires you to be doing work worth answering with. The quiet is only powerful if there is something real underneath it. I could afford my stillness on that flight line because I had put in the 19 years, the 10,000 boring mornings, the day in the valley I would give anything to undo. If you have not done the work yet, then the insult stings for a true reason, and the answer is not a clever comeback, it is the work itself. Started today, continued when no one is watching, until one morning someone underestimates you and you find you do not need to argue. Because the proof is already in your hands. Build the thing they will not see coming. Then you will never have to announce it. I flew for 19 years before a lieutenant asked me if I ever had. I did not tell him. I took him up in the aircraft and let the truth arrive the way truth arrives, on its own schedule, undeniable, and it changed him, which telling him never would have. Whoever decided who you are, let them. Then go do the thing you actually do. It outranks the insult. It always has. Hold it steady. You've got them.